Welcome. Welcome again, everyone. Always wonderful to see you taking care of your lives in this way, coming out to practice together, practice the Dhamma together. Beautiful. So this being Tuesday, this is the Tuesday Tune-In program, and that means that I'll be offering about 25 or 30 minutes of guided meditation to start us out, and then we'll shift and I'll give a Dhamma talk, reflection, and usually about 30 minutes or so of that. And then we'll have some time for questions, comments, reflections at the end of the evening. And yes, so that pretty much sums it up. And this evening I thought that we would begin with very, very simple mindfulness of breathing activity. So sometimes those simple ones are the more challenging because the mind has to be willing to settle down to that. But perhaps I can drop a few pointers as we go along that will help. So can begin to settle into your meditation posture. I usually like to begin with a bit of movement, just some gentle rocking or movement of the head. Loosening up any tension in the body or any tendency to lean toward the computer. And really sensing the weight of the body on your seat. Relaxing the belly. Allowing the body to settle right here in this place. And from that steady base, as best you can, allowing the spine to come into alignment. Bringing you into an upright posture. Perhaps allowing the muscles around the ribs and the chest to also soften and widen. Softening the eyes, softening the mouth. And perhaps beginning to observe the sensations of the breath, breathing the body. And just allowing those natural rhythms of the breath. And beginning to tune into the pauses, those natural moments of stillness between the in-breaths and the out-breaths. No need to make them any longer or shorter. Just staying present for those pauses. Perhaps noticing that if you are present for the whole pause, then you can also observe the start of each part of the breath. So really noticing those moments of impermanence, shift from stillness into movement. If you find yourself getting tight or wanting to control the breath, just move your attention down to the lower abdomen and observe the echo of the breath in that part of the body. And having found those beginnings of the breath, allowing the mind to ride along the length of the breath, no matter how long or short it is, just carried along on the breath until you arrive at the pause. Beautiful. So that was our meditation practice for this evening. And as I said, we can, if you have any comments or questions or reflections about that, we can come back to that a little later. But right now, I'm going to offer a Dhamma reflection. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. A very long time ago, in a very far away place from where most of us are, I think everybody here on the screen, as well as folks in person, there was a woman who gave a Dharma teaching, a Dharma reflection of her own. And this is what she had to say at that time. She said, I have cultivated the path, the noble eightfold path that leads to the deathless. Nirvana has been realized. I have looked into the mirror of the teaching. And it's that last line that I really want to talk about today. This metaphor of the teaching as a mirror. So this word of teaching that's being translated here as teaching is the word Dhamma or Dharma, if you're more familiar with the Sanskrit terms, Dhamma and Pali. Those are the two ancient languages of Buddhism. Among the two, there are many actually. And so this word Dhamma has many, many different meanings. If you look it up, it's one of those words. If you look up in the Pali English dictionary, for example, you probably find about 24 or 25 different entries what this word Dhamma means. And so, of course, there is this Dhamma as the teaching, Dhamma as the instructions, if you will, that have been passed along over the years. Just like this nun, this woman who gave this teaching many, many years ago. And Dhamma also has the meaning of reality. So we could say that it is a teaching that is pointing to reality. Because the way that wisdom is understood within Buddhism, generally speaking, without getting into too much detail, the way that wisdom is generally understood is to know and see things as they truly are. To know and see things as they really are. So it is a teaching that is pointing at this reality, and it is a description of the reality that is actually experienced or seen or known or felt. There's this lovely phrase in many of the early teachings, kayena pusitva. It means having touched it with the body. It's said of wisdom that one who has it has touched it with the body. So we might think of that as like saying, knowing it in your bones or having a visceral experience of wisdom, of reality, of the true nature of one's own experience. And this is where the mirror part comes in. Because the irony of being a seeker, a spiritual seeker, is that what is to be found is not out there anywhere. It is a question of this inner reflection. So we look at the Dhamma, and the Dhamma points us back to ourselves. And that's not always an easy place to look, frankly, to look at our own situation, our own lived experience. But that is actually, I would propose, why meditation is a key aspect of the path. So this teacher, this great ancient noble teacher, whose name is Kisa Gotami, Venerable Kisa Gotami, who gave this teaching long ago, she speaks of the Noble Path, the Eightfold Path. So what is the Eightfold Path? Just to name them and briefly, so you have right view. And this word right is samma, it means something more like sound, like that's a sound decision. Not right, it's not right in a black and white kind of sense. That would be a mistake, because that would presume that there was some thing that there was some external benchmark. But again, what we're talking about is this way in which we are investigating our own experience. So right view has to do with understanding the efficacy of action, you could say, with understanding that what we choose in our lives makes a difference, and that we can choose a life that increases our dissatisfaction and suffering and difficulty, or we can choose a life that is going to bring less of all that. That is going to bring peace. So the other side of dukkha is what I'm calling here difficulty or unsatisfactoriness or suffering. And the other side of dukkha is not happiness, it's peace, actually. So understanding that we can make these choices. But between the point of making the choice, perhaps, to say that I'd like to understand the nature of things in such a way that I could actually lead a life that had less dukkha, less difficulty, less dissatisfaction. And the point of actually realizing such a thing, there is the rest of the path. There is an unfolding that has to happen. So there's choice, but there's also more that unfolds along with that choice. So the second part of the path is right intention. So it is bringing this choice to the fore, if you will, being willing to to set up an intention of harmlessness to the extent that you can. That's really what right intention is about. And it also is involved with renunciation. And renunciation here, we could use renunciation as an understanding of the perils of materialism, rather than renunciation in the sense of like perhaps becoming a monk or a nun or something, or going off to some cave somewhere. And then you have right speech. So using your words in a way that is leading away from greed, hatred, and more confusion. So a deep, deep value for honesty and self-respect and respect for others. And then right effort has to do with wholesome states, being able to discern wholesome states, but also creating those wholesome states. And so this is where we start to see the usefulness of these choices, how these choices start to unfold in a little bit more joy in your life, a little bit less agitation, some better relationships, different kinds of wholesome meditative states. You might see shifts in your meditation and so on. And then right livelihood. So doing, again, choosing some kind of making a living that is mitigating suffering to the extent possible, and your own and others. And then we have, where are we here on the path? So we have so far right view, right intention, right speech, right effort. Oh, I've missed right action, and then right livelihood in there somewhere. I always get the list all. Yeah. So right action is about ethics. And non-harming, non-killing, non-stealing, those kinds of things. No, leaving behind any kind of sexual misconduct. And right livelihood, and then we have right mindfulness. So bringing a wise attention, receptive form of attention and presence to your life. Because you truly cannot practice with anything that you cannot be mindful of. You don't even know it's there. And then right concentration, right absorption. Being able to focus the mind so that we can truly begin to observe things that we can observe when the mind is not that calm, when the mind is more busy or agitated, less focused, more diffused. So we have these various aspects of the path, and all of these, again, while they have their external effects, they're showing us about the internal effects of the choices that we make, and about what's actually happening here. What are the principles that are at work? So Kisa Gotami says that she looked in the mirror of the Dhamma. And it's a very poignant statement in her case, because her backstory is very, very poignant backstory. So her name, Kisa, means somebody who's haggard. It's a word that kind of means like skinny and ugly. Kisa Gotami, and her Gotami was her given name. And she was married to somebody that she cared about, but their family, the family of this person, didn't treat her very well. They didn't appreciate her. She wasn't a person who had come from a lot of wealth or a family that was very respected or well-mannered and so on. And so they weren't really very appreciative of her being added to the family. But then she had a little baby boy, and then they were very excited, and they were nicer to her because she had the heir of the family. She'd given birth to this little boy. But the little boy got sick, and he died. And then it was all going to fall apart, right? And it all falls apart because people who love you only for what you can produce, then that always eventually falls apart. In her case, sooner rather than later. The little boy died very young. And she was so distraught because not only did she love this child and care very much for this child, but his death also meant that, again, her life would become hell. Her life would become really quite difficult. And so what happened was that she became overwhelmed with the grief of the death of this child. And she went around the town carrying the body of her baby and asking for help, asking people if they could help her bring her little boy back to life or make him well. And so fortunately, somehow she was sent to the Buddha. Somebody said, please go talk to the Buddha. And so she approached the Buddha and she said, please help me make my little boy well. And instead of explaining to her, or just saying that's not possible, or any of that, the Buddha said, okay, go, I will make things well. And you will go from house to house and find a handful of mustard seeds from a house. Just that's all you need, is bring me a handful of mustard seeds, but it has to be from a household where there haven't been any deaths. So she said, okay, all right, I'm on it. And she started going from house to house. And people were willing to help. People said yes. She would say, oh, I need a handful of mustard seeds. It's a very small thing, actually. I mean, small literally in terms of the size of the thing, but also just a very inexpensive, very common household item that people would have to cook with in northern India at that time. So everybody had it. And it wasn't really a hard thing to give. And so they would all say yes. And then she would say, okay, has there been a death in the house? And they would say, well, of course. There's no family that hasn't. Our family's lost someone. Our family's lost many people. Right? And so this story is very interesting. There's so many teachings in this story. It's been told many, many, many times. Because what happens eventually is that Kisa Gotami realizes that there's no family where she is going to find a place where there hasn't been someone touched by death. But that's part of the human experience. And when she is able to realize that for herself and accept that, then she is able to accept the death of her child. And it said that she takes the child to the graveyard and returns back to the Buddha to sit down and begin studying the Dharma. So part of what's beautiful about this story is that the metaphor of her walking from house to house is actually both a literal practice that the Buddha gave her, not forcing her to try to sit down and calm her mind in the midst of this complete overwhelm, but also it is emblematic of what we do, right? We think we need to run around. That's going to solve our problem. We're going to go here, we're going to go there, and somebody is going to have the answer to our problem over there, or maybe over there, or maybe over here, or maybe over there, or maybe this person or that person. Yeah. But what the Buddha showed her is that even the Buddha himself wasn't the answer to her problem. The problem began to resolve itself when she had the self-reflection about her own experience of life and about everyone's experience of life. She had to come to that herself. And we all have to do that. That is the nature of the path. The nature of the path is such that nobody can save you. Even if the Buddha were here himself, he could not do it for you. He said that quite clearly to many people. We all have to walk our own path. But to walk this path is to also see, to also look in the mirror of experience and see the commonality of it, the universality of it. And to see, as Kisa Gotami did, that even in the most horrible moments of your life, it's possible, with the support of our friends, with the support of people who even inadvertently are helping, we can actually come to find peace with our own situation. Mm. And it began with this recognition. You know, it begins with this, just as I said, right view, with this understanding. Aha, right. In this life, we have the choice to run after this or that and think that there is some resolution to dukkha out there, but we have the choice to look inward and see that deep reality, discover something that has always been there, but that we haven't been quite ready to see. So it's a beautiful story in part because Kisa Gotami goes on to become an arahant. She is one of many women of the Buddha's time that the Buddha himself extolled as being the foremost practitioners of his time. Women who were not only fully enlightened, but that he specifically called out as being literally some of the best practitioners he'd ever encountered among thousands and thousands of people that the Buddha taught. Tens of thousands, potentially. So she says again, I have cultivated the path, the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the deathless. So notice that also in contrast to her story about death, that when we talk about the deathless, nirvana as the deathless, it doesn't mean some kind of eternal life, but it means putting to rest all of that activity, all of that wandering in the world of confusion. So she says that she's experienced nirvana. Nirvana has been realized. Notice that they never say I always find it quite interesting these days what people are attracted to in terms of teachers. You hear, maybe it's just me because I'm on Twitter, you hear quite strange things about what people think is a good teacher or not a good teacher. Let me put my phone here for a second. Anybody who says, I'm enlightened, I am an arahant, I have completed the path, that's not it. You almost never see that in the suttas. You almost never see that. Why? Because the whole understanding of awakening is the falling away of that sense of I have done this thing. Because you understand the nature of experience and how the whole, literally, like the whole of all things, has to cooperate to some extent for the conditions to come together in that way. Which sounds really daunting, but thankfully, you don't have to do it. Thankfully, the path that the Buddha set forth, just as he did with Gotami, Kisa Gotami, right? Going out and realizing that this is how it is. This is the nature of it. That is what we're asked to do. Not to create something out of nothing. Not to create, to build the ultimate perfect being. So when she says she has looked in the mirror of the teaching, she says, nirvana has been realized, not I have realized nirvana. Nirvana has been realized. And the other thing that points to is, besides the wholeness of it, is that you're not there. If there is any sense of you there, then it's not nirvana. Keep going. Just keep going. And she looked in the mirror of the teaching, and what was it that she saw? She says, I laid down the burden and did what had to be done. Or actually, again, it was laid down the burden and done what had to be done. Mind released. Mind released. So to be on the path of spirituality, as it's described in this way, in this tradition, is to both make the choice, but to know that it is to make the choice, but it is to know that it is a choice to actually find that you are this reality that you are looking at. That the Dhamma reflects it back to you. That there is, ask people who have gobs of money, there is nothing and no one and no place out there that will give you the kind of peace of mind that the Dhamma can give you. Because that only happens when the wandering stops, when the looking out there for the answer stops. But know that there are helpers. There are helpers. And helpers are very important. Kisa Gotami had her helper in the Buddha, who set her this task that she could discern for herself what she needed to do to take that first step away from being overwhelmed by her suffering. And we too have our helpers in the Sangha, in our teachers, in the books, Dhamma. These days, all sorts of Dhamma materials online. Dhamma friends. So I hope that you find that you are able and willing to make that choice, to look in the mirror. Thank you.